Welcome to Haunting Live Podcast, a place where we bring a new paranormal guest each episode to share their journey and experiences.
This animal was really starting to give this couple the creeps because it was standing and just staring at them. So the husband unslung his .22 rifle from his back and popped off around at this creature's feet, trying to get it to run off. It did not have the desired effect. Instead, the creature began growling, and they described it as this very low, guttural, generally terrifying growl.
Are you looking for that hard-to-find item, spiritual item that your loved one wants to always get, but you don't know where to check out? Why not check us out here underneath HauntingLivePodcast.com. Underneath our store, though, we actually have tons of items, from dream catchers, crystals, so many more for you. Check us out underneath HauntingLivePodcast.com.
Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, log in and Podbean and Facebook Live with Divine Oracle Podcast and Haunting Live. Trevor from Haunting Live will be doing chat with you guys, while Brother Chris from Divine Oracle Podcast will be offering soul coaching cards. Reach out and listen live. You never know what the spirits want you to know. Each and every Saturday at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, join Divine Oracle Podcast with your host, psychic comedian Chris and Jillian. They interview a lot of people within the spiritual community and also discuss a lot of topics with Indigenous and non-Indigenous spiritual teachings. Join them Saturdays at 10 o'clock on most apps that are actually out there. But if you're looking for them directly, look for them underneath Podbean or underneath Divine Oracle Podcast.
Well, welcome to this episode of Haunting Live. We have a former guest that's been on the show before talking about his writing and his books that he does. And he also has a blog now that he's going to be talking about today too. So please welcome back Travis Watson to the show. Hi Travis, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking me back again.
Well, I figured it was a fitting time to have you back on the show. You've been busy putting out some blogs there, I see, so we're going to talk about that and some other kind of creepy stuff for Halloween month in October. DOGMAN and shapeshifters, I believe, right?
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, I guess we could talk shapeshifters too. I've got a little bit of everything lined up for tonight, so whatever you want to start with.
Okay, sounds great. Well, we'll touch on whatever topics you have available and go from there. But first of all, you've been on the show before, but people might not have heard your previous episodes. So do you want to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do first?
Sure. My name is Travis Watson. I write under W.T. Watson just to avoid confusion. If you see my books, then you'll see the title W.T. Watson. I'm the author of 5 different books on the paranormal, ranging from my initial book on the Phantom Blackdog phenomena through when I moved to Canada, I did Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, and then Sasquatch Canada. I've also written a book called Mysteries in the Mist, which is all about mist, fog, and clouds and the paranormal. And my most recent work is called The Forest Poltergeist, which is kind of an examination of what's called a Class B sighting in Sasquatch lore, where nobody actually sees the creature, but stuff happens around them, and the comparisons with poltergeist lore. That's the last thing I published. That was back in 2023. I've been on kind of a hiatus for the last little bit, but recently started blogging, putting some stories out there. Some of the things that I've gotten from my research, and also things that I've happened across listening to podcasts, looking at all the various stuff out on the internet. There's always new stories coming in. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not currently working on a book, but I'm looking at retirement in the next couple of years. So, I'm sure something will happen then because I'm going to need something to do.
I was going to say retirement from your day job or from your
From my
author?
day job, yeah. Oh, no, I probably will stop authoring when they pry the pen out of my cold, dead fingers. So it's my passion.
It's always good to have something that you can do, and especially if you are retiring so soon, you'd want something that can keep you busy for those days too, right? So that's good that you
Exactly.
can still do that day to day. So okay, well, let's get into the topics here for this episode, and let's start with Dogman encounters. That seems to be a very popular topic on podcasts and stuff these days. There's
Yeah.
even specific podcasts that are just Dogman podcasts, and I listened to one of those, and it's pretty interesting hearing
Yeah.
experiences that people have had, and like, can you tell if those stories are real or made up or not? Like,
I mean,
what's your opinion on that kind of stuff first?
well, yeah, I think that um, a lot of people who are, because I've listened to some of the Dogman top podcasts too, and you have the same kind of situation happening with the Dogman or man wolf phenomena as you do with Sasquatch. Um, a lot of people assume that they've encountered a Sasquatch because, they're hearing footsteps in the woods, they're having things thrown at them, all of that Class B type phenomena. They're hearing cries in the woods they can't identify. Um, they're seeing these stick structures out in the woods and all this stuff. So they assume that what's happening is that they're encountering a Sasquatch. Now that the Dogman thing has become more popular or more well known, I guess, there's a certain subset of people, I think, that are assuming that they're encountering dogmen in their area because they're having the same kinds of experiences. They're having things thrown at them. They're hearing vocalizations. They're hearing growling. They're hearing they're finding footprints and all these kinds of things that lead them to believe that uh, whatever's going on around them has to do with Dogman. I argue in the Forest Poltergeist that it may not be that if they're not actually seeing an actual Dogman out there. It may be something akin to the poltergeist phenomena. Um, as to the people that have actually seen one of these creatures. Yeah, I'm loath to look at a witness and say, well, I think that person is lying. I don't know what they experienced. I don't know what their experience was. I don't know if they're psychic. They could be having a vision of the other world for all I know. Um, you know, but the thing that strikes me about a lot of the dogman slash man wolf incidents is the commonality. Um, so with these things, you get an individual describing what they frequently describe as a werewolf. They're talking about a bipedal canid, usually with legs that they describe as bending funny, like the back legs of a dog. Um, Often they describe these beings as having hands, but those hands have claws. Um, but the thing that resonates through these stories is the description of the head. Um, they're frequently described as wolf-like, almost always described as having very upright ears like a German Shepherd. Um, and unlike the Sasquatch, which tends to fade off into the woods or go away the majority of the time, dogmen seem to be a little bit more aggressive. They seem to be a little bit more territorial. So all of these things are commonalities that we see in the dogman stories. And because there are quite a number of these stories um, coming in from all over, not just, yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about some stories from Canada. But there's stories from Michigan, there's stories from Wisconsin, but I've also encountered stories from places like Texas, or Illinois, other places that the researcher Linda Godfrey, who's passed on since, did a wonderful job of cataloging tons of dogman stories. And the commonalities are such that I have to believe that people are encountering something. Now, what the something is, I don't know. You know, just as the same as we don't really know what a Sasquatch is. We know that people are encountering something in the woods that has a common appearance that, almost all of us now can identify, because if nothing else, we've seen, jerky commercials with Sasquatch in it, right? We know there's something out there. We don't know what it is. We can conjecture a lot, and obviously that's happened. But the plain and simple fact of the matter is we have no idea. We really don't know what we're dealing with. Other than the fact that, particularly with dogmen, there seems to be a very physical phenomena associated with these sightings, and these critters seem like they could be dangerous. As I said, I've not found any, and as Linda Godfrey says, I've not found any examples of a dogman actually injuring somebody. But there are plenty of examples of them being aggressive and basically running people out of areas, making sure that they go away. So in some of the stories that I could talk about tonight, will kind of emphasize that. But I mean, again, we have no idea what these creatures are. The theories range from, it's some kind of a evolution of the timber wolf, which for whatever reason has evolved to bipedal locomotion, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But I mean, nature is weird. You never know. It could happen, all the way to Linda Godfrey pointed out that, and actually made maps and stuff, that these creatures are frequently sighted near Native American sites, particularly mounds, which may or may not be burial mounds. In one of her stories, a very early story, I think it was in the 1930s, and this was in Wisconsin somewhere. A security guard for a girls' school encounters one of these creatures digging in a mound. So there's a strong association there between the dogman and these burial mounds. Dogmen and Sasquatch are sometimes seen in cemeteries. So there's some association with the dead, with death, with maybe these creatures could be guardians of these mounds. We don't know. And if I see one, I'm going to keep a nice long distance between me and it and observe quietly because I don't want to tick one of these things off. They look pretty, they look like they could do some damage. So
Yeah, they do for sure. Like, you don't want to upset one of these things, I don't think. But in the encounters also, it seems to feel sometimes that they're there to induce fear. A lot of people
yeah.
say they get this sense of dread when they're around, and they don't necessarily see the creature, but they just feel something. Do you find? Have you heard that also?
Oh yeah, and it's not an uncommon thing. We see this in Sasquatch lore as well, where people have this feeling of impending doom, basically. There are some researchers that theorize that these creatures are using infrasound, much like a tiger does to freeze its prey. If you take a more energetic view of things, maybe a more spiritualist view of things, each of us has an energy signature. And I think that it may be that these creatures simply don't resonate with us. It's like you get a disharmony going, and that manifests in your body as, I don't feel so good about this. I want to get out of here. Which would explain the fear as well. Either way, frequently the case that people experience I mean, honestly, if you see a 6 or 7 foot tall werewolf standing in the woods, it's going to scare the crud out of you anyway. I don't care who you are, And add to that the fact that these beings seem to have above average intelligence and, seem to be able even to communicate maybe telepathically with people. And, you can understand, that people would have a feeling that they needed to vacate the premises and they needed to do it right now. Because it's just not, it does not seem like a good idea to hang around.
Well, it's the same with Sasquatch too, right? It's like
Yeah.
they get a lot of the same similarities, events or feelings surrounding an encounter with both these creatures or entities. So it's like, are they connected in some way? Are they the same thing and they're just forming differently? Or
Well, if I go down the rabbit hole, which I warned you about, but if I go down the rabbit hole, when you look at books like Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner's Where the Footsteps End, there is a strong association in Sasquatch lore, and I haven't found this to be so much the case with DOGMAN, but it may just be because people haven't talked about it yet. But in Sasquatch lore, Renner and Cutchin and Wes Germer, who runs the Sasquatch Chronicles podcast, have all noted that Sasquatch is associated with anomalous lights. Now, if we go way down the rabbit hole, is it possible that these anomalous lights are actually the true form of whatever this phenomena is? And, they manifest in whatever way they choose to manifest, whether it's as a Sasquatch or, as a dog man or something else. There's all kinds of strange, we've got Mothman flying around and got all kinds of weird stuff happening, on a daily basis almost. So, we don't know. Again, one of the fun things about doing this stuff is that it's all a mystery and we really have no idea what's going on. So you can stop and think about that kind of thing. But the anomalous lights thing has really interested me because it's anomalous lights are also associated with fairy lore. Maybe Sasquatch and Dogmen are actually creatures of the other world, that just happen to be manifesting in our reality right now. Again, we don't know. And that's the fun of doing this research.
well, exactly too. Just as a relevant story, we did a private investigation in Ontario here in July. We were invited to private property, and one of the reports there on that property was a person there seeing a light floating above the tree line.
Okay.
And some Sasquatch activity there too. So she
Okay.
actually physically saw Sasquatch and the lights. So is it even happening
At the same
here
time?
in Ontario at the same time?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Renner and Cutchin have a story where a witness actually saw a Sasquatch holding one of these balls of light. In fact, I think Timothy Renner did a drawing for the cover of one of those books. There's two of them. One of them's about evidence, and the other one is about the witnesses, or something like that. But the cover of the one has Sasquatch holding a ball of light. We just, again, that's why we call them mysteries.
yeah, exactly. It's
So,
who knows if we're going to be able to solve this mystery, but it's continuing, and I think people will just continue to have more experiences. Hopefully, that will
well,
lead to more answers. But as long as we keep investigating, hopefully it will.
hopefully, but we just, we never know. So, one of the
Yes.
things that I should point out is that, everybody thinks that Dogman is an American phenomena, right? And in my research, that's not true. Now there don't seem to be quite as many encounters here in Canada, but there certainly are encounters in Canada. Linda Godfrey and Lon Strickler from Phantoms and Monsters and some of these other folks have documented quite a number of cases in the Canadian wilderness. I'm looking at one here back in December 2012 in Alberta, in a place called Crow's Nest Pass. And this one was really interesting because this man wolf, this dog man, was not afraid of a firearm, but it ended up being afraid of a camera. which I thought was really interesting. Husband and wife were doing cross-country skiing. They spotted what they took to be an extremely large wolf in the tree line. The creature was down on all fours at that point in time, but they both testified that this thing was, 3.5 to 4 feet tall at the shoulder. So it was quite large. I had an Irish wolfhound that measured 37 inches at the shoulder, and he was a big boy. So I kind of have a feel for that. So this animal was really starting to give this couple the creeps because it was standing and just staring at them. So the husband unslung his .22 rifle from his back and popped off around at this creature's feet, trying to get it to run off. It did not have the desired effect. Instead, the creature began growling, and they described it as this very low, guttural, um, generally terrifying growl. So the husband, maybe not being the smartest person on the planet, puts a round in a tree near this wolf's head. And all of a sudden, this critter stands up on two legs. Again, witnesses testify that this thing was 6.5 to 7 feet tall, and the growling got louder. At that point, hubby loses it and opens fire on this thing in earnest. He claims that he hit the creature in the chest 3 times. 22s are generally used for hunting small game. So I wouldn't expect that a 22 round would take down, any kind of a large animal, but it certainly would sting when it hit. This bipedal creature runs off into the woods on 2 legs, and it starts emitting this very strange scream or howl. The couple took that opportunity to beat feet. Basically, they took off toward their vehicle. But as they're going along on their skis, they can tell that this creature is following them through the woods. The wife, and this is where it gets really weird, the wife thought about taking her phone out and trying to get a picture of this creature. And she suddenly had a overwhelming feeling. You might almost call it a telepathic communication, that if she tried to take a picture of this thing, that this dogman would kill her and her husband. So again, we have a situation where this creature wasn't put off by a firearm, but it didn't want to have its picture taken, which is really odd, but not the first time that we've seen this. There was another Dogman episode in Alberta, in the Mount Baldy area, if I remember correctly. This heavy equipment operator, this was in 2011. This fellow was hiking up in the Mount Baldy area, and he was carrying a firearm as well. He was carrying a 410 shotgun, which, again, small caliber, usually used for birds and things like that. About halfway up the trail, he sees a huge wolf walk onto the path, and it refuses to let him go by. Now, this is uncharacteristic behavior in wolves. Generally, if you see one, you see it, and they disappear. They're gone. But in this particular case, the wolf stood in the path and refused to let him go by. He stated, again, that it was larger than any timber wolf he'd ever seen, either captive or in the wild. The witness did the usual thing of trying to talk to the creature. He yelled at it. Again, this creature just looked at him. Witness backed away and fired his shotgun in the air, but the wolf wouldn't budge. I mean, it just stood there. Now, I'm reminded of phantom blackdogs when this kind of thing happens, because phantom blackdogs will frequently do this kind of thing where they're obstructing a path, and it's usually to keep the witness from getting into trouble. But we don't really know, because I think the witness fled after this happened. So this witness was pretty sure he wasn't dealing with an ordinary canine at this point in time. So he reached in his bag for a camera. And as soon as he pulled the camera out, this wolf darted into the bush, and the witness took an opportunity to flee back into a more open area. He spotted the creature again, and this time it was standing on two legs, looking at him from behind a pine tree. Again, when the witness raised his camera to try to get a picture, this critter disappeared. So, and funny postscript, the witness tried to report this to a conservation officer, and he was told that he was simply mistaken because there were no wolves that size in that area. So, I mean, it's one of the things that we see a lot in Sasquatch accounts and these dogman accounts. If you try to report it to the authorities, they just brush you off. You saw a wolf, you saw a bear, you saw, whatever, standing on two legs. You obviously don't know what you're talking about. And the thing that bugs me about that is, particularly with Sasquatch, but also I think with a lot of these dogman encounters, some of these witnesses have spent more time in the woods than the conservation officers have. They're hunters, they're fisher people, they're outdoors people. They like to ride, they like to ride their ATVs out in the woods. They're out there all the time. They know what the local wildlife looks like. Some of the people that see these things are native people, although they won't talk about it, because they have cultural taboos about discussing these things. But, a lot of these people have a lot of time in the woods. They know the local wildlife. They know the difference between a bear and a Sasquatch. If they tell you that a wolf is acting in an uncharacteristic manner, it's probably acting in an uncharacteristic manner. So I get a little irritated with these, when I see these accounts where the local officials just brush them off and tell them that they saw a dog or something.
Haunting Live announces for Halloween our back-to-back special presentation called Witches and Werewolves, with 2 special shows, October 30th and 31st. Listen both nights for tales of witches and werewolves on Haunting Live. Yeah, unfortunately that does happen too much, I think, as well. So it's like they can't even agree that there's natural animals out there at times. Like in the U.S., there's not supposed to be cougars or some stuff like that in certain areas, but people report them, and then they go, "Oh no, they don't have those here."
And they're there.
Yeah, but I saw one.
Yeah, the eastern United States, east of the Mississippi River, is supposed to be free of cougars, but they are being seen increasingly, especially in the Appalachian Mountains. But the state wildlife people don't want to admit that they have cougars in the area, because then they have to develop a plan for managing them. And I think, if you look at it from that standpoint, they probably are afraid that if somebody actually proves that Sasquatch exists, they're going to have to come up with a management plan for these things.
Well, in some cases, I think they do already, because you only sometimes encounter certain creatures in certain areas. So is it a theory out there that they put them in a certain area so they stay there?
Yeah.
That's one of the theories.
It's a possibility.
I think that's out there too.
I know that in some of the very Sasquatch-rich areas of, the town that borders Lake Okanagan, I can't recall the name of it, actually has if I remember correctly, and this was a long time ago when I was writing Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, but they actually have some kind of a law or regulation or something that you can't hunt the lake monster. There is a town in California that has laws against hunting Sasquatch or interfering with them or harming them in any way. And some of these things are done as kind of tourist stunts, but you also have a large group of people who are having experiences on an ongoing basis in some of these areas, and it's hard not to take them seriously. Even if what they're telling you strikes you as being, off kilter or woo woo or whatever. I mean, maybe better safe than sorry.
Well, I think there's a plus side to that as well, is if you're not out hunting them or whatever, and you put in place this protective area for them, like a national park or something per se, that's going to keep a safe area for them. And then, in turn, people will have more encounters, and in turn, may be able to prove that they actually do exist, right?
Maybe,
So
yeah.
it might be a way of proving it.
I'm not absolutely convinced that Sasquatch or Dogman, either one, are a, like a gorilla or, Timberwolf or whatever. There's a belief, something Linda Godfrey talks about, and something that I've posited on my own. There's a belief amongst a lot of native people that Sasquatch, for instance, is actually a creature of the other world, however they call that, whatever their particular name for it is, and that it is able to walk between worlds, assume a physical form while it's here, thus the footprints, and then walk back when it's done doing whatever it's doing. In this account, in this, you know, I have to give some credence to this because there are so many stories of Sasquatch tracks going dump, 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 and then just disappearing. They're gone. And they're in strata that should keep showing prints. The sand on a riverbank, a snow-covered field that hasn't been disturbed, those kinds of things. And we have the association of Sasquatch and Dogman both. In my book, Mysteries and Myths, where I talk about mist, fog, and clouds and the paranormal, there are Sasquatch and Dogman sightings that are associated with these mysterious myths that come up. Now, we can argue that those myths are weather related, but until you read the end portion of my book and you find out how weird things really can get. But it's something to consider. It's something to consider. I'm one of these people that's kind of an either or not an either or, a both and thinker. You know, if there was going to be for instance, giant bipedal primate or, a bipedal wolf, existing in the wilderness somewhere, Canada's the place to be. You have, the human population of Canada generally lives, of course there are exceptions, but the vast majority of people in Canada live within, say, 100 miles of the U.S. border. Just because that's where the cities and so forth are. There are people that live out in the bush. There are people that live on the reserves out there. But your chances of encountering people once you get up north are, much less than down here. We actually have a species that was declared extinct that was rediscovered in Canada, the wood buffalo. So if you're going to hide a large bipedal wolf or a large bipedal primate anywhere, a physical being, Canada's the place to do it. Because if we can lose the second largest land animal in North America, or actually it is the largest by weight, the wood buffalo is, then we could certainly lose a Sasquatch or a man wolf or two. But I also have to take into account, Sasquatch Canada has a whole chapter about the strange sightings where people are watching one of these things walk down the side of the road and it just disappears. So there's a possibility that there is a physical animal. There's also a good possibility that, there's something more going on. There's something spiritual going on. Something that walks between worlds, maybe. There are people that theorize that, that some of the Sasquatch sightings are actually, I can't speak to man wolf sightings on this, but some of the Sasquatch sightings are actually ghosts, that they are the spiritual remnants of something like a Gigantopithecus, yeah, which would account for why sometimes it doesn't leave footprints when it's supposed to be this massive, heavy thing. So, I mean, it's too easy for people to get into their silo, and say, okay, well, Sasquatch is a giant monkey in the woods. Man wolf is a bipedal a bipedal canid of some type that we just haven't identified yet. You can take the very cryptozoological outlook to it. But if you shut your mind to all the other stuff, then you are ignoring some of the witnesses. And I just don't think that's acceptable.
No, I agree to that too. But let's speaking of things changing and stuff like that, let's switch over to shapeshifters now, because that's
Sure.
also spiritual, and I don't know how much people have encountered those creatures or how many stories there are of actual shapeshifters out there, but if you want to go ahead with that, you can
Yeah,
fill us in
there
on some
are
stuff.
not a lot of shapeshifter stories. Most of the shapeshifter stuff, like witness accounts, most of the shapeshifter stuff that you encounter is folklore. And of course the Germans have a rich folklore of werewolves. So did the French. The French had their loup-garou. And the interesting thing about the loup-garou is that whereas the French or the German werewolf was kind of this ravening thing that would eat anything in its path, um, there was a strong religious twist to the lore of the loup-garou, which became the rougarou in Louisiana. But there is a strong religious twist to the loup-garou legends, in that the person who was cursed to become a loup-garou was generally somebody who'd been um, um, not fulfilling their religious obligations. They hadn't been going to confession, they hadn't been going to mass, they'd been going out drinking and sleeping in instead of going to mass on Sunday morning and that kind of thing. And the interesting thing too is that the loup-garou curse had a very specific time limit on it. It was 101 days. The curse could only be broken by the shedding of the blood of the loup-garou. Either that or they had to stay a loup-garou for 101 days, right? So it's very interesting that these werewolf stories that came over from Europe and settled here in Canada, particularly in French Canada, um, were actually had this strong religious component to them. So you might theorize that, oh, well, it's just the church trying to scare people into going to mass, right? But we also have, plenty of stories where there's one from the 1800s. A young man named Andre was apprenticed to a hunter, and he finds out that his mentor is a loup-garou. Now, the other interesting thing about the loup-garou is that they generally maintained their human mind even when they were in their wolf form. So they didn't typically prey on humans unless they happened to be bad people altogether. Didn't typically prey on humans. They were more dangerous to livestock, and that sort of thing. But in any event, this young man finds out that his mentor is a loup-garou. He chooses to stay on with this fellow because this hunter, his mentor, gives him a charm that's supposed to keep him safe from attack by a loup-garou, right? They're out in the brush, they're doing their thing, they're doing their hunting thing, and so forth. This young apprentice spots this loup-garou that is his mentor, and instead of relying on his charm, he actually throws the charm at the loup-garou. It draws blood and breaks the curse. So it's just an interesting little story from the 1800s. I mean, okay, so we've removed basically the religious aspect of it completely, and there you go. You still have a werewolf story, but it has a happy ending for a change. Some of the German werewolf stories are extremely bloody. um, and the French certainly had a very intense respect for and fear for the loup-garou when the beast of Gévaudan was doing its thing in the province of Gévaudan, France. There were a lot of people who believed that the beast was a werewolf, a loup-garou. And this thing killed over 100 people, apparently, from what we can gather from the historical records. That could be a whole show all by itself. It's a very, very intense story that's, uh, you know, that's scary. It's really scary because whatever this thing was, whether it was a werewolf or some kind of a zoo animal that got loose, it was preying on people. The other interesting thing about another interesting story about the loup-garou, again, this one's from the 1800s. It's from 1882, and it actually came out of the Atlantic Monthly, which is a publication in the United States. But there was a gentleman who was an independent landowner in Canada. They called them habitants. And he was a very devout man. He was informed by a passing postal sled, I believe, that his neighbor was on death's door. Now, there's no priest in this area within 50 miles, so this gentleman grabs his rosary and his Bible and his prayer book and takes off to try and be with his neighbor before he passes. As he's traveling, again, he's in his sled and he's got his horses and he's trotting along. As he's traveling, he sees that he's being pursued by the loup-garou, which resembles a huge wolf with glowing eyes, which always makes me think of Phantom Blackdogs again, because they have the glowing eyes. But so he resembles a huge wolf, glowing eyes, but it utters like a human-like cry, and this is how we know we're being pursued by a loup-garou, right? The habitant, says his prayers, whips the horses up, and off they go. So this loup-garou is chasing him through the forest as he's trying to get to his neighbor's house. The habitant does actually beat the loup-garou to the neighbor's cabin, and he bars the door with a prayer book. So we've got that religious thing going again. He does the holy water, and he hears the man's last words and witnesses his death, and so forth. The weird part about this story is that we never find out what happens to the loup-garou. Yeah. Now, this creature chases him through the woods, but you would think that a wolf would be able to catch a sled being drawn by horses. But it chases him, but it never actually catches him. And this reminds us of the DOGMAN stories where people will encroach on this creature's territory and it will chase them until apparently they leave the territory and then it turns back. It's kind of, you have to wonder if there's not some connection between these loup-garou stories, the werewolf stories, and the modern day man wolf or dogman, if we want to call it that. So I found that a really interesting story just from the standpoint of why was the loup-garou chasing him? Is it possible, because of course everybody assumes that the loup-garou is chasing people to eat them or whatever, right? But is it possible that this creature was actually, kind of escorting him to this neighbor so that somebody would be with him when he died? I mean, we don't know. But it's an interesting story.
Yeah, maybe getting him there faster so he makes it there on time.
Yeah, possibly. Now, another one of those glowing-eyed wolf stories. I had trouble finding any kind of a loup-garou type story that actually, that they were a threat to people. And in fact, in this one, which comes from 1859. This comes from a fellow named George Nelson, who was a famous fur trader. and was fascinated by Native American lore. And this was a story that was told to him by native lore. Um, it's old habits, too many years in the States. This person told him about a Cree man who was out hunting, as you would, got caught in a storm and was forced to take cover really in the open. There was no good place for him to hunker down and shelter from the storm, and he was pretty much convinced that he was going to freeze to death. As he was laying there, he suddenly had much larger problems because all of a sudden, this very large creature that looked like a black wolf, again with the glowing eyes, appeared before him. But instead of, doing bad things to him, doing him in, this wolf actually moved in close to him and helped him stay warm. After the worst of the storm had blown over, the wolf got up and basically beckoned to him with eyes that appeared like two candles, is the quote, and led him to a watering hole where there were other native, other indigenous people, and thus saved his life. So this spirit wolf that appears from nowhere actually plays the role of guardian for this fellow instead of being the big, scary, nasty werewolf thing. So
That's interesting. I've never really heard a story like that before from a Dogman werewolf story. So.
Yeah, where you do hear these stories is in the Phantom Blackdog stories. They maybe not frequently, but often, in their lore, there is, the large dog that appears at the side of the road, as the traveler is walking down the road and stays with the traveler. And they don't realize that this is anything more than a regular dog until they encounter danger, usually in the form of highway robbers or something along that line. And then the dog defends them or scares off the bad guys, as the case may be, and they continue walking for a ways. And once the individual who's traveling is safe, say they pass through the gate of their home, the dog disappears. There's a great story in Phantom Blackdogs, which is my first book. This fellow was a member of the staff for the Oxford English Dictionary back when it first was founded, and he took his family on holiday in the mountains. They're walking on a trail, and as happens, they get socked in by fog and can't see where they're going. He's soldiering on because he's convinced he knows where he's going. This large dog with glowing eyes appears in front of him and won't let him pass. No matter what he tries to go around the dog, he tries to go through the dog, he tries everything to get past his dog. The dog will not let him pass. Until the fog clears, the dog disappears, and the guy realizes that if he had kept going the way he was going, he would have walked off a cliff. So there are, these great stories of, mysterious canids. And you wonder, if you take a Phantom Blackdog and you stand it up on two legs, what do you get? Probably get a man wolf, right? There's these great stories of these dogmen, man wolves, or whatever, actually protecting people. So, I mean, it's not all scary, stuff where people are getting chased and eaten and stuff.
Well, it's interesting to hear those types of stories too, because you always encounter the ones that are negative, but it's good to know that there's also positive ones out there too that actually help people or save people too. So.
Was it you that I was talking to that had seen a black dog at a cemetery?
No, not me. No.
Okay, I would have sworn that one of the Canadian people that I talked to had a black dog story.
Oh, probably, yeah. No, I
But
just had
yeah, I mean,
more Sasquatch encounters than Dogman encounters, so I
okay,
don't think I've
okay.
encountered one yet. So, but
Well, yeah, you keep hanging around, paranormal stuff. You never know
yeah,
what you're going to find.
well, we do a lot of
Um,
cemeteries, so you never know. So,
yeah, and they are known for, the black dog phenomena seems to have a strong link to the whole church grim idea, where um, people would actually sacrifice. The belief was that the first thing buried in a graveyard would become the guardian of that graveyard. So people would actually sacrifice a dog to be the guardian of the graveyard, so that the first person buried there didn't have to end up being the guardian of the graveyard. So there's there's some evidence that the Phantom Black Dog, some of the Phantom Black Dog lore rose from that idea, the idea of the Church Grim. And you see Phantom Black Dogs being associated with cemeteries on both sides of the ocean. Um, there's strong Phantom Black Dog lore in Nova Scotia, for instance, and even into Quebec, if I recall. The funny thing that I discovered doing that book was that there's actually a Phantom Black Dog in the South American and Central American countries. It's called the Cadejo. So they're everywhere.
yeah, no, they are. I just haven't run into one yet, so I don't know if I want to either. So,
Yeah, well, like I said, they can be protective in nature, so it might not be a bad thing.
well, thank you very much, Travis, for sharing some stories in the spooky Halloween lead-up season, anyway, to October, and great
Well,
hearing some of those werewolf and loup-garou and black dog stories. That's really cool.
you're more than welcome. It was a pleasure being on, and I always seem to get calls at the Halloween time of year. It's
Yeah,
it's
lots of
everybody's
perfect
favorite
content
time to talk about spooky stuff.
for sure. Do you want to promote your blogs a little bit that you're working on before we let you go and tell people how you could find them?
Sure. So I believe you're going to post the link in the show notes. I started a blog. Well, I started a website actually that you can find my books on, and I started a blog. Um, the website and the blog are called The Liminal Way. And I started the blog because I wanted to keep my hand in writing, of course. Um, and also because, I keep encountering these fun stories in different places. And, I wanted to have an opportunity to write about them and talk about them, you know. I did a whole series when I first started the blog on what I call the silence, where I don't know, I'm sure that you've noticed in some of the stories that you've heard where people will talk about this eerie or unnatural silence descending before some kind of paranormal thing occurs. I theorized a while back that mist, fog, and clouds were associated with the paranormal. This, to me, is another one of those signs that you may be about to have an incursion happening. When that silence descends, something's going on. Now, you may not actually see anything or have an experience, but the silence itself, I think, is kind of an opening of a portal to the other world. So my first few blog posts are about the silence in relationship to Sasquatch and dogmen and all kinds of other things, from the cryptozoological to the really bizarre, mysterious disappearance stuff. So I forget how many posts I have up now, but there's quite a few. So for those folks that are interested in reading some spooky stories at Halloween, this is a good place to go.
For sure, and yeah, definitely we'll have that link in the show notes for people to check out and encourage them to do so, and hopefully listen to this episode as well that you're sharing some stories on. So, well, it's been an honor having you back on, and you're more than welcome back when you have a new book out, hopefully not too soon, and get some new content out there for your books as well. So, thank you,
Okay.
Travis, for being on
Yeah,
HauntingLive.
like I said, the books are all listed on the website as well. So if people are interested in the books, they're available on Amazon.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks much.
Miss one of our episodes? Replay our episodes on Rhode Island Broadcasting. Show your support for Haunting Live by supporting our broadcast partner, Rhode Island Broadcasting. Find them on YouTube.